Starting this list off in at number 10, the Battle of Iwo Jima. James Lee Niger was born in 1998, and when he was just 2 years old, he pointed to a picture of Iwo Jima in the Pacific, and he told his parents that where his plane was shot down, and he kept telling them that he was a lieutenant in World War II. His parents were pretty shocked by this, and they decided to do some digging on their own. They discovered that only one plane was shot down in that location, and it belonged to the American pilot Lieutenant James Houston Jr., who was killed by the Japanese in 1945 at the end of World War II. The little boy even said that his ship was called the Natoma, and he would have constant nightmares about the crash, and he would yell things like airplane crashed and on fire in his sleep. His parents met with Lieutenant James's crew, and they all confirmed that every detail that this little boy was saying was actually 100% accurate. And guys, say it with me right now. Is this real life right now?
In our number 9 spot, we have The Water is Coming. A woman's son that chose to remain nameless had an obsession with the Titanic. He was constantly talking about the Titanic and wanting to watch the movie, and so one day she decided to take him to the Titanic exhibit. After going there, he began to have night terrors, and one night in particular she would never forget. She was watching TV when she heard loud banging in her son's room. She went inside to see him on all fours and heard him yell, "Go, go, go, the water is coming." And then he let out a scream. But it wasn't his voice. It was the voice of an older man coming out of him. Apparently after that incident, her son started to talk about it less, and she chalked it up to that maybe his soul had come to terms with the catastrophe and was more at peace. Wow. I definitely would have been extremely terrified if I had witnessed this. I wouldn't have been able to go back to sleep, at least, that's for sure. In our number 8 spot, we have Michael Kushner. A TikToker and photographer by the name of Michael Kushner explained his Titanic story and how he has memories from the incident. In his explanation, he spoke about how around 7 years old is when you start to lose your memories from a past life, and when he was 7, he saw the Titanic movie 4 times, and every time he saw the sinking scene, he felt that something wasn't right. Throughout his life, the Titanic followed him everywhere. When he moved to London, it was the 100-year anniversary, and on the day he landed, a ship sunk, and everyone was saying that it was just like the Titanic. The first playbill he ever photographed was called The Unsinkable Molly Brown. And even James Cameron, the director of the Titanic, said he didn't feel the sinking scene was depicted accurately and explained why, and Michael said that his explanation aligned with what he felt. Out of all of the stories that I'm going to tell you about today, this guy definitely feels like he could have been on the Titanic in another life. Would love to know your thoughts in the comment section below. In our number 7 spot, we have Paul Emerald. Paul Emerald is a Los Angeles producer that took part in a series of past life regressions for a television show he was working on. What he found, though, led to a journey that he did not expect, and he even wrote a book on it. He was convinced for so long that he wasn't going to live past the age of 25, and when he started doing these regressions, he realized that he had a lot of weird similarities with a passenger that died on the ship named John Jack Phillips, who was 25 when the boat sank. He decided to visit John's hometown, and it was there that he experienced major deja vu, like he knew where everything was. So he did some more regressions and saw John's whole life. He is convinced that John was him in another life. Wow, that's an incredible story. Imagine just going to a random town and knowing where everything is because you were there in another life. In our number 6 spot, we have the mysterious Reddit user. This is told by a Reddit user who explained that he always had a fascination with the Titanic and an overwhelming amount of sadness and empathy around the situation. He explains that he's not a very empathetic person, but for some reason he feels an increased amount of empathy for those that died on the ship. This user always freaks out when it comes to water, and drowning is one of their biggest fears. They did a past life meditation to see if they could get a name, but only got a picture of being somewhere cold and icy. So interesting. I think it's possible that maybe there's a lot of people out there that didn't actually die on the Titanic, but they did die on like a shipwreck in a past life, and then maybe it would make sense why they would resonate with the Titanic, but Who knows? In our number 5 spot, we have A Love to Remember. A 19-year-old woman by the name of Amanda remembered being on the Titanic with her past love. She remembered being a first-class passenger by the name of Julia who met her man named Mark on board the ship. They both ended up taking a lifeboat together and surviving the disaster, and later on ended up getting married. Amanda said that she has a hard time finding love in her life nowadays because no one quite meets the standards of her previous love. Aw, that's sweet and terribly sad. Hopefully she ends up finding him again in this life. In our number 4 spot, we have the claustrophobic man. This person is another Reddit user that very much considers themselves to have died on the Titanic in a past life, and their justification? They hate being cold and can't swim well. Interesting. He said, "I'm deeply claustrophobic, and so maybe I got trapped somehow, but all I know is that I've been deeply fascinated by the Titanic and the movie." Do you think it's possible that the movie casted some kind of spell on people around the world, and because it felt so lifelike, people just felt as if they were there? Another user commented that they did lock passengers in the steerage, so it's possible this person was one of those passengers. Coming up in our number 3 spot, we have the girl with the green eyes. This person believed they were on the Titanic because of a past life regression circle that they took part in. This person is a part of a pagan group, and one day they were doing a past life regression exercise, and she saw herself go down a long hallway with white walls and wood paneling and a plush red carpet and a fancy wooden door at the end of the hallway. Honestly, this sounds like the final scene from the movie, but I'm gonna go on. Anyway, she goes into a room filled with water, and a girl comes up to her with piercing green eyes and a blue lily crystal hairpin in her hair. Her eyes were filled with tears. They got into a lifeboat together, but then the girl got out and continued to hold her hand. Once they lowered the boat, her hand slipped from the girl's hand as they were separated. Interesting. I swear something like that happens in the movie as well. I really wonder what people were saying before the movie came out and if their experiences were described similarly then. In our number 2 spot, we have Alfred Peacock. A young boy that was born 2 years after the sinking of the Titanic would have tons of visions of being on the Titanic growing up. He felt that he was on the Titanic and couldn't imagine any other explanations for his visions. He remembered being a young boy on the Titanic and that he lived in the 3rd class cabin with his family. He remembered that his name started with an A and ended with an E and a D, and that led him to think that his name was Alfred. After doing some research of the passengers that died on the ship, he came across an Alfred Peacock that was young on the ship, and he believed that his memories were then confirmed. In our number 1 spot, we have Charles Latoller. A man remembers being a passenger on the Titanic that went by the name of Charles Latoller. Charles was a British sailor who was a 2nd officer on board the Titanic. He did not die on the Titanic, he was one of the survivors, and went on to live till the 50s. So this person must not be too old if he feels that he really was him in another life. He has flashes of walking down the staircase on the ship and seeing beautiful gowns. He always felt connected to the Titanic, and after discovering a picture of Charles, he knew he felt a connection with it, and he felt that it was himself. In June of 2001, when he was writing a book about the Titanic, a woman randomly came up to him in a coffee shop and told him that he was on the Titanic, and opened up one of his research books of the Titanic and pointed to an officer, and sure enough, she pointed to Charles Latoller. Freaky!
Starting off at number 10, we have the Russian kindergartner. Now, this story surrounds a girl who was Russian in her past life. Her mother claims that when her daughter was learning the alphabet, she kept mixing up her letters. She would mix up her B's and V's and H's and N's. These letters aren't that similar, so it left her and her teacher confused, especially since her daughter kept saying, "I don't remember those." This little girl then states that she remembers the letter H and that it makes an N sound. Then she said that she knew more letters and began to write out the Russian alphabet. Her mom asked her where she learned that, and she said, "Vlad taught me before he disappeared, and not Vlad the vampire." This little girl claimed that Vlad was her brother in her past life. How freaky! Like, there's no way that this young girl just happened to know the Russian alphabet, unless it was from her past life.
Next up, number 9, we have the final resting place. Kids are known to say some pretty disturbing and creepy things, but this next kid probably takes the cake. According to this person on Reddit, she said that her family took everyone on a trip to see their old neighborhood. They drove by a house where 15 years earlier, a little girl was hit by a car and she passed away. Her cousin, who was about 4 years old at the time, has never been to the neighborhood and she never heard of anything about this sad story. But all of a sudden, she stopped what she was doing, looked up, and said, "Oh, that's where I died, isn't it?" And then she went back to playing with her dolls as if she didn't just say the scariest thing in the world. I literally have goosebumps now just hearing about that, and I don't even know how to respond to that. Moving things right along, in at number 8, we have the Hollywood actor. This next story is actually pretty creepy, well, because there are so many similarities with this one. A kid used to have memories about being a Hollywood actor who turned into an agent. He said that he was born in 1903 and he had so many vivid memories of a past life. He said that he had been in movies and worked for an agency. He saw the world on a big boat and he had a large house with a swimming pool. He kept going on about specific details about this past life, and one day he pointed to the TV and said, "Hey, that's me." His parents did a ton of background checks, and as it turns out, everything that this little boy said was true. The man in the movie was named Marty Martin, and he used to be a Hollywood star who danced on Broadway, but then he went to work for an agency company and he went to Europe on the Queen Mary. And guess what? He had fancy cars, a big house with a swimming pool, a ton of other details that this kid said. It actually matched up perfectly with this guy's life. If this is true, then this is actually super impressive, and I get pretty creeped out thinking about it, because I actually think this kid lived a past life. A tragic accident takes us to number 7. Back in 1968, a mechanic named Rashid got into a deadly car accident with his friend Abraham. They were driving to the military beach in Beirut, but unfortunately the driver lost control and died instantly. 1 year later, after this tragic crash, a little boy named Daniel was born. His first words were Abraham, and when he was just 2 years old, he repeatedly claimed that he wanted to go home and that his parents weren't his real parents. He also said his real father's name was Naim, and as it turns out, that was the name of Rashid's father. I mean, pretty creepy, right? Well, there's more to the story. It doesn't end there. As Daniel and his mother were driving near the place where Rashid had died, Daniel immediately recognized the place and he told his mother, "This is where I died." There's way too many coincidences happening with this one, so let's move on. Our murderer brings us to number 6. Now, if I were to be reincarnated, I wouldn't want my past life to be someone who used to murder. Well, this next reincarnation story comes from Facebook user Chelsea Kingeray, and they talked about how their 3-year-old and his memories about his past life. Well, this is what she had to say. "My 3-year-old son told me that he smothered someone once. I asked him if he knew what that meant. He said it meant holding a pillow on someone's head until they stopped breathing. I asked him when he did that, and he said, oh, long time ago." Let's just stop right there. I mean, is this kid a murderer? How does he know what that is? If I was this kid's parents, I would definitely not be sleeping tonight because I don't want to be smothered. In fact, I'd go to the nearest hardware store, put a lock on my kid's door, and he's not coming out at nighttime. Now at number 5, we have a child with a mistaken identity. When a little girl was just 4 years old, she told her parents that her real house was in the city of Mathura, which is about 90 miles away, and she said that her husband, Kedar Nath, lives there. She even told her teacher that she died 10 days after giving birth to her child. Her teacher decided to do some research of her own, and she found out that a man named Kedar Nath does live there, and he lost his wife 9 years ago after she gave birth to her son. I mean, this just can't be a fluke. The little girl went on to meet him and she instantly recognized him. This is absolutely insane, and I'm actually really starting to believe these stories, this like concept of reincarnation. A pro golfer takes us to number 4. Bobby Jones was a professional golfer from the 1920s who unfortunately died from a spinal disease. But in 2016, a 3-year-old boy claimed to be this professional golfer. The little boy's father showed him 6 pictures of famous golfers from the 1920s and asked him to identify which was the picture of him in, his past life. Well, he immediately pointed to the picture of himself, of Bobby Jones, and he said that was him. He also pointed to another picture and said, "This is my friend Harry Garden," and as it turns out, that was a picture of famous golfer Harry Garden. Through research, scientists say that children who remember their past lives lives have about a 9% chance of having skills related to their previous life. So for this little boy, he went on to win 41 out of 50 junior golf tournaments by the age of 7 years old. So I don't know, is this a little bit cheating? Because you've played golf for a very long time. Up next, number 3, we have an infant who remembers being a grandfather. This is pretty bizarre. A young boy named Gus Taylor was born just 18 months after his grandfather had passed away. When he was about 1.5 years old, he started to remember details from his past life. While his father was changing his diaper, he looked up and said, "When I was your age, I used to change your diapers." Gus believed that he was his dead grandfather talking to him, and he started saying things about his grandfather's life that he couldn't possibly have known. When he was 1.5 years old, he was speaking in full sentences, and he started to say chilling things to his parents about a sister that he had in his past life. He said that his sister turned into a fish, and as it turns out, his grandfather had a sister, and her body was found in the San Francisco Bay after she was murdered 60 years ago. I mean, how the heck could he have known this? This list is actually really starting to freak me out. The strange story about a teacher takes us to number 2. When a little boy from Thailand was 3 years old, he started telling his parents stories about he used to be a teacher named Abu Kai, and he was shot and killed when he was riding his bike to school. He begged his family to take him to his old village, and finally his grandmother took him. Once they got off the bus, he led her straight to a house where an old couple lived. They were the parents of Bu Kai, who was a teacher who had been shot and killed while on his bike. I mean, what makes this story even more bizarre is that this little boy was born with birthmarks in the exact same place where this teacher was shot. I mean, coincidence? You know what? I'll let you guys be the judge. Topping this list at number 1, we have the little boy who remembered where his past life body was buried and who killed him. I mean, wait. What? Is this real life right now? Well, haters will say, well, this is just an overactive imagination, but hear me out. A 3-year-old boy started telling his parents stories about a past life that he used to live. He started to tell them more and more stories about his past, and he even said that he was murdered in his past life. He told them exactly how it happened and where it happened. Out of curiosity, these parents thought, you know what? I'm gonna look into the story a little bit more. I'm gonna do some investigation. And they went into the story and they went to the murder spot and they began to dig. I mean, I would be pretty curious as well, but when they dug deeper, they actually came across a body. The little boy said that he was murdered by someone with an axe, and he even has a red birthmark on his face that matches the exact same location. He was even able to tell them where the murder weapon was, and he said that they knew who killed him in his past life. When the police went to confront the murderer, he actually gave up and the murderer made a confession. I don't know about you guys, but the story is actually making me believe in reincarnation, like I was telling you. I mean, after hearing about all of this, how can you not?
Coming up at our number 10 spot, we have the couldn't shower woman. This person on Reddit mentioned that throughout her whole life, she has been obsessed with the Titanic, but in a way where she has always feared it. Her biggest fear was the Titanic for so long, not bugs or monsters under the bed. It was always the Titanic. She subsequently feared water because she would constantly have flashes of being on the Titanic when in water, and especially if it was cold. Her memories and thoughts were so vivid that she actually had a hard time showering and would have her sister sit in the bathroom with her until she was 17 years old. Whenever she would see pictures of sunken ships, and specifically when she saw pics of the Titanic, she would get anxious, even though sometimes she would seek them out. She doesn't have any specific memories, just flashes of staring up at the boat as it was sinking, and it has completely altered her life. That's wild. Imagine being so scared that you would literally need someone to be in the bathroom with you while you shower. She either was actually on the Titanic or she really needs to speak to someone about her active imagination. That would be so terrifying to experience.
At number 9, we have the daughter who just wants to go home. This mother claims that when her daughter was young, she kept begging her mom to take her home. When she asked where her home was, she said that she used to live near the water with her other family. That was until one day she passed away. She would even draw pictures of her past home and retell memories of her watching the waves. She also refers to her mom as Pa and wants to go back home to her other Mahi. Moving on to number 8, we have The Boy and the Scottish Pub. Just like the title suggests, this story takes place in a pub in Scotland. When a 4-year-old and his family stopped at a pub in a small village in Cairngorms, the little boy recognized the pub immediately and said, My favorite place! The boy was able to direct his dad to the bathroom in the pub, which was said to be hidden behind a wall and not even labeled. Then the little boy kept saying how much he loved this pub and sitting beside the fire. But there was no fireplace, but the boy insisted that there used to be one against a certain wall. Then he continued to talk about more details of the pub and about the owner and his friend Fred. Bar staff then said that his claims were correct. Fred was the owner there, but passed away 10 years ago. Okay, wow. Either this kid has been sneaking out and partying it up at this pub, or he truly did go there in his past life. Moving on to number 7, we have the boy who is his own grandfather. Yeah, you heard me correctly. This boy claims to be the reincarnation of his grandfather. A year before Gus Taylor was born, his grandfather had passed away. However, when the baby was 18 months, he started referring to himself as his own grandfather, Grandpa Augie. When he was 4, he could point out his grandpa in photographs despite never even seeing him before. Gus would also talk about his sister. Now, the grandfather's sister had been murdered and they always kept that from Gus, but somehow he already knew this detail and would continuously talk about his past sister. Creepy. And also super confusing. So the grandfather was the dad to Gus's mom, but his mom gave birth to her dad, the grandfather? That's so weird. Next up at number 6 we have Cameron McAuley. Now there is a short little documentary on Cameron in case you are wondering and want to check it out as well. So basically when Cameron was 2 years old he kept saying that he had another life on a remote island called Barra. Now Cameron was from Glasgow, but Barra is an hour flight away, approximately 220 miles from Glasgow. For 3 years Cameron kept talking about his family in Barra. He said he had brothers and sisters and even had a black and white sheepdog. He said he remembers living in a white house near the beach and remembers planes landing nearby. He even remembers the view outside from his house's window. Cameron began missing his family so much that he would become super upset. That's when they ended up going to Barra to find his home. When they did find his home, it had the same view that Cameron described and was apparently even home to the same dog. However, Cameron said he had a father named Shane Robertson that passed away from getting hit in a car. This is the one thing that doesn't check out. Apparently there was never a Shane Robertson that lived there, so who's Shane? Honestly, maybe it was his father from like 2 lives ago. Who even knows? We are now at our halfway mark with Shanti Devi. Shanti Devi was born in 1926 in India. When she was 4 years old, she started making claims about her real name, her other family, and her past life. Apparently, she told her parents that she lived 145 kilometers away in a place called Mathura with her husband Kedar Nath. She also said that she died after giving birth to her child. Apparently, she even had the same talking habits as someone from Mathura. Her family eventually took her to the other village and found the man she claimed to be her husband by the name of Kedar Nath. Kedar then told them that he did lose his wife 9 years ago, 10 days after delivering their son. Now, Kedar was skeptical of this girl's claims, so when he went to go meet Shanti, he pretended to just be his brother. But Shanti instantly recognized him as her husband from her past life. Next on my list at number 4 we have James Leyanger. Born in 1998, when James was 2, he claimed to be a lieutenant and passed away when his plane was shot down. Now, just like any other parent would do, they just brushed it aside, saying that he had a wild imagination. But then he kept describing accurate information. When they researched into this plane crash, they found that there was an American pilot named Lieutenant James Houston Jr. who passed away in 1945 towards the end of World War II. First off, what are the odds that he gets reincarnated and his parents literally picked the same name? Now, the boy continued to talk about his ship, the Natoma, which was also true. He would also have reoccurring nightmares about an airplane crash. His parents then met Lieutenant James's crew, who are all old by now, but they confirmed the details that James mentioned, saying that they were all accurate and only the lieutenant and the crew could have known some of the details. Coming in at number 3 we have Edward Austrian. Edward Austrian was 4 years old when he claimed that he was a soldier from World War I. He kept saying that he passed away after taking a bullet to the throat. In fact, Edward continuously would get sore throats and would say that his shot wound was hurting. Doctors couldn't even explain why he was constantly getting these sore throats, and in fact he even developed a cyst in his throat at one point. Eventually the cyst mysteriously went away on its own after Edward started talking more about his past life. He claims that he was a soldier named James that was 18 years old. He has vivid memories from his past life that he would share with his family. One day he said, and I quote, "We were walking along through the mud. It was damp, it was cold. My rifle is heavy. I remember looking out and seeing trees, and then there was desolation. I heard a shot come from behind. It went through someone else, hit me square in the back of the neck, and I felt my throat fill with blood." There's no way a 4-year-old could have made up those details, especially since his parents claim that they've never let him watch any soldier or war-related movies or shows. Next up at number 2, we have the boy from Thailand. Chennai was 3 years old when he started having memories of his past life. This 3-year-old boy remembers being a teacher named Bua Kai. He talked about his previous family, wife, and children. He said that he passed away after being shot in the head while walking to school. What's freaky is that this boy has 2 birthmarks on his face. One on the back of his head and one above his left eye. Those are the exact spots where the bullet entered and exited Bua Kai's head. Now, people believe that birthmarks tell some sort of story from our past lives. In this case, it symbolizes how he was killed in his past. Now, Bua Kai was a real person that passed away about 5 years before Chennai was born. Coming in at number 1, we have the boy who solved his own murder. When a boy in Syria Golan Heights was 3, he began saying that he had been murdered in his past life. The boy said that he was killed by getting an axe to his head. This boy even had a long red birthmark on his head. In this boy's case, the birthmark also showed the way that he passed away. Now, it turns out that this boy's story checked out. They took him to the village that he said he once lived in, and even showed his family where his body was buried. When they unearthed his body, they found a boy's skeleton with an axe wound in the skeleton's skull. Like, there's no way that a kid could have just known where a body was buried by coincidence. But it doesn't stop there. The kid also remembered who the killer was and his full name. They then confronted him and he eventually admitted to the crime.